Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs and another edition of In Defense of. And today I have a special guest, Mr. Reed Little. You may know him from the Contrarians and various other channels. Reed, wonderful to finally have you on the channel. Really been looking forward to this.
I really appreciate the invite. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this one as well. Glad to finally be on the bicycle legs.
Thank you. So today we are going to be looking at an Iggy Pop album that really the critics absolutely roasted this album when it came out at the time, and that is Party. Now, this album was released in June of 1981 on Arista Records. It did not do well in the charts. It only got to a number 166 on the US Billboard. It did a little bit better here in Australia. It got all the way up to number 93. So yeah, really, this album did not sell a lot of copies. And as I say, the critics absolutely roasted this album. I get the general impression this is not a big favorite with the Iggy fan base either. But as is usually the case with these In Defense of albums, what Reed and I are going to do is we're going to argue in favor of this album. Not necessarily that it's the best thing that Iggy ever did, but that it's a worthwhile album and has some really good music on it. So Reed, when did you sort of get into Iggy Pop, and when did you sort of first come across this album?
So those are two very different answers, as it turns out. And I should say now, 1981, I was 13 years old, and I had been listening to music for several years, but really just paying attention to what was on the radio. So I never heard this album when it came out. I had no idea who Iggy Pop was in 1981. Nobody I knew who Iggy Pop was. MTV hadn't started yet, so this album was not supported by videos or other things, which were ways that we were introduced to music. So I really first became aware of Iggy Pop because of my love of David Bowie. And as I was working through, now this is about 2012 probably, as I was really getting into Bowie's Berlin period, of course, I discovered some pundits will argue that Lust for Life and The Idiot are actually Bowie's first two Berlin albums, not Low. So I acquired them and listened to it and went, oh, this is not anything like I imagined when people talk about the godfather of punk, which is something that is often applied to Iggy Pop.
Yeah.
Which now I've listened to a lot more Iggy. I'm also a big proponent of his most recent album, Every Loser. It's got some great songs on it. But my thought exercise when I started listening to this album is, what is an Iggy Pop album supposed to sound like? Because if you listen to The Idiot and Lust for Life, and then you listen to Family Values, those things don't sound anything alike. Soldier doesn't sound like Family Values. Party doesn't sound like Soldier. I mean, Iggy didn't produce two albums that sounded the same. So I find it weird that people chose this one to kind of decide that it was the album that they didn't like.
Yeah. Well, I first experienced Iggy quite young. I was sort of it was my pre-teens. I used to watch a show here in Australia called Countdown, which was similar to a sort of Top of the Pops kind of show, where bands would come on and usually mime to their sort of latest hit or whatever. And Iggy actually came on in, I think it was 1979 or 1980, and did I'm Bored from the New Values album. And he absolutely refused point blank to mime properly to the song. He would have the microphone all over the place, and in one point he even stuck it down his pants.
That sounds like Iggy.
And then he did this interview with the host, Molly Meldrum, where he was literally bouncing off his chair and going, ha-ha, and things like this. He was completely wasted.
Right.
But I sort of became a lot more familiar with Iggy a little later on, obviously with the Blah, Blah, Blah album, which was actually a big hit here. His version of Real Wild Child hit the charts here. To this day, a remix of Real Wild Child is used in the sort of like the bumpers for a music show that plays sort of throughout the night on ABC TV here, which is called Rage. And they use sort of like, they use this weird mix of Real Wild Child as bumpers. But about 8 or 10 years ago, I started seriously collecting Iggy, and that's when I sort of got all these albums, including this one, Party. And yeah, I agree with you that he goes all over the musical map on his various albums. Why do the fans really hate this one? I don't know. It's more the critics. Like the fans, I think, are divided on this album, but the critics at the time universally panned to this album. So,
right.
But let's go through it track by track, and I think we'll find that at least in our opinion, there's some really, really good music on this album.
Sure.
So we start off with the opening track, Pleasure. What were your thoughts on that one?
So I love the way this album starts. I think Pleasure is a fantastic opening. It just hits you with this blast of noise right up front. So there are many songs that are stylistically different. So I'm going to make some production comments on this one. I love how happy the tone of this album is, right? Which is, I don't know if that's why he called it Party or if he was going to call it Party in advance, but this album, the tone of this song I think of is raucous. It's happy, it's brash and abrasive, and it's fast. And it starts off with horns, which horns were experiencing a brief rock and roll revival at the beginning of the 1980s. Although I wouldn't have thought of that, you know, with something like the Stooges. So I think it's a great opener, up tempo. It's a real attention getter, right? It opens the song on this, or the album on this happy note. But let me say this, Iggy can be a very interesting lyricist, but his lyrics, for the most part on this album, I'm not particularly fond of. And because his voice is mixed so clearly in the production of this album, you can hear every word he's saying, and some of them is just nonsense. You know, someday I'm going to squeeze you like a tomato. Someday I'm going to peel you like a potato. And then he has the chorus come in and sing it with him later. It's almost like, to me, Iggy Pop is a performer in the thespian sense. I think that he creates a character in his own mind that he presents these songs through, right? And at least according to the internet, I guess he's got an autobiography. I've never read it. People want stupid amounts of money for it on the collector's market, so I have not been able to pick up a copy. But he was supposed to produce a very commercial album for Arista. And I think that he's like making fun of that in a way. He's making fun of the idea of commerciality with these really superficial lyrics. But I love the music. It's just so, like I said, it's so happy and upbeat, and it sounds great. Not much bottom end, but very, very brash and exciting. And it would be a great party record.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I noted that, you know, right from the start, you've got this sort of difference from previous Iggy albums because you get this blast of the horns to start the song. And I agree, it's a really great sort of high energy album opener. But apart from the horns and the general sort of brightness that you're talking about, to me, it still has that sort of punky delivery in the vocals and the guitars that you really expect from an Iggy song. And I like that too. Yeah, I mean, the first 7 tracks on this album were produced by Tom Panunzio. And then the last 3 produced by Tommy Boyce from the Boyce and Hart songwriting partnership that wrote so many songs for the Monkees and the like. But we'll get to those last 3 songs as we go along. But yeah, this is I really can't add much to what you had to say there, Reed. I really feel like it is a great high energy album opener. I do agree that the lyrics are a little trashy. It's funny, this was supposed to be a commercial album, and for the most part, it really doesn't sound like one to me. I don't really
No.
feel like Iggy made a commercial album until he got to blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's a really great song, and I really like it as a start to the album. So the next song is called Rock and Roll Party.
Yes.
What were your thoughts on this one?
So I will say, because this album is often described as Iggy's new wave album, as I was listening to it, I became a little obsessed with, do I think this is a new wave song or do I not think this is a new wave song? And I want to state right up front, I don't think this is a new wave album.
No, not on the whole.
There are a couple of songs that sort of lean new wave-ish, but it's like, if you go back and listen to Alice Cooper's albums that are referred to as his new wave period, those aren't new wave albums. Well, this isn't a new wave album. So I have a lot of notes about, you know what, this song is not really a new wave song. I love, again, I actually love the first 3 songs on this album a lot. Rock and Roll Party has that great upfront bass line. The guitar is less distorted. And those 2 things, cleaner guitar and more upfront bass, are what makes it kind of more new wave-ish. But what pulls it back from being new wave is Iggy's vocal performance. His vocals on this song are so over the top. Just like on the first album or on the first song, he's not just singing, he's shouting, he's exuberant, and they have him mixed so far forward, it's just slamming in your face. And that was not a characteristic of new wave music at all, but it was of Iggy. It's very garage rock. And I have already forgotten the name of the guy who co-wrote and plays guitar on this album.
Ivan Krall.
Krall, yeah. He was a great garage rock style guitar player. And I love his guitar lines on this album. So yeah, Rock and Roll Party. Again, I think the lyrics are perhaps just a little bit, man, ironic is the wrong term, but they're a little playful.
Yeah.
They're maybe not meant to be profound or taken seriously, but great track.
Yeah. No, Ivan Krall, he was, or before this album, he'd done a lot of work with Patti Smith. So that's sort of the sort of music area that he's coming from. But yeah, I mean, you were saying it's not, the ironic's not the right word for the lyrics. I said that the cliche song title, because I mean, it really is a very cliche title, isn't it? Rock and Roll Party. But I said that that with the lyrics, Iggy seems to be taking the piss of that concept, you know? So rather than just being ironic, he's just absolutely taking the mickey out of it, making a complete joke of it. I said this was a really cool rocker, although I thought the backing vocals sound a little incongruous on this song. Like, they just sound so clean and bright, and they just don't fit well with Iggy's, as you said, really exuberant, brash, sort of acting sort of vocal that he does on the song. And I also really like, there's like a creepy organ on this song that I really enjoy. So yeah, this is a really cool song. Now, the next one is Eggs on Plate.
Okay, Eggs on Plate. This is one of the things that I'm a big proponent of in all of these shows where we're talking about music, is trying to put it in a, pardon me, my diction is off today, trying to put it in a historical context, because you lose so much coming into it 42 years later, right? But this is 1981, and Iggy is rapping on a song. It's not what you would think of as rap by the time you hit the late 80s or 90s, but in the early 80s, this was what rap was. And in fact, the only commercially successful song with rap on it by 1981 was Debbie Harry's Rapture, or excuse me,
Yeah.
Blondie's Rapture. So very interesting that Iggy also has a rapped song in 1981. And that is context that is completely lost in the ensuing, because now I'm sure people are going to listen to that and go, that's not rap. What are you talking about? It absolutely was rap in 1981. More than that, it is Iggy's weirdest vocal performance on the album, but it has that great line. Dee, 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 dee. I love the guitar lines on this whole album. Crawl had some great lines. They're just so hooky, right? And it's got that weird guitar line in four walls. They're, you know, the guy's constantly singing over the top of it. And according to the internet, this song was originally written for Mick Ronson. I have a massive hard time imagining Mick Ronson arranging this song into sound. He wouldn't have done it like Iggy does it. That's for sure.
Oh no. No. The other band that sort of like was adding rap to a song around this time was Talking Heads. If you think of the song Cross-Eyed and Painless, it's got that bit at the end, you know, sort of facts are simple and facts are straight, facts are easy and facts are late. You know, that was influenced by early rap as well. But you know what vibe I really got from this song? I got a real B-52s vibe from this song.
Oh yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
The guitar, the bongos, Iggy's delivery, it's got a bit of a Fred Schneider sort of feel to it. And I'm totally here for that. I think it works great. I think it's absolutely wonderful. Even the lyric itself has a sort of a B-52s feel to it, a bit that sort of surrealist sort of weirdness. And the falsetto in the middle eight also gives me a sort of a B-52s vibe. But yeah, I really, really love this song.
Okay. Yeah, I would. So I'm not super familiar with the B-52s. I've only listened to their what were radio songs in the US, but just saying that, I'm like, yeah, okay, I get that.
Yeah.
Oh.
So the next song is Sincerity.
Pardon me. So I don't have a ton of deep things to say about Sincerity, but I will say, I feel like this song feels very early 60s to me. If you think about the type of music that had really replaced rock, it wasn't quite Motown yet, but sort of that style of music with the female singers and, you know, the Ronettes or something like that. That's what Sincerity feels like to me, is very much a 60s style song for the first, if you imagine it as a layer cake, 2/3 of that cake is 1960s, and then they slab a third of garage rock over the top of it. Which was a very interesting confection. And again, you've got Iggy singing completely over the top. So you've got that crawl guitar line, you've got Iggy singing over the top, and that's really the primary impression that these songs leave on me, is just that. I said that it's an Iggy Pop album, so he has every right to be the most powerful thing on the album. But it's a strange mix, that 1960s plus garage. I mean, garage rock started in the 60s, but the much later 60s, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I do see what you're saying. The feel I got from it, and again, I don't know if this is a genre that you've listened to much, I got a real sort of British pub rock feel to this song.
Oh yeah, don't know anything about it.
And pub rock definitely did have those sort of influences, so the garage rock and the soul and that sort of thing. The horns fit in really well with this one, give it that soul-y sort of feel. Yeah, I think this is another genre that fits Iggy well. You know, he, again, as you say, he's right up front and center with this, as he is on the whole album. But yeah, definitely a sort of a British pub rock feel I get with this song. But I really, really love this song. So yeah,
I have to take your word for that one.
Yeah,
it is not a genre that I have any experience with.
But it's a sort of 4 from 4 for me so far, as far as really good songs go.
Right.
And then we get Houston is Hot Tonight to end side 1.
So this is, I think, just in the little research I did while preparing for the show, this seems to be a lot of people's favorite track on the album. And it's probably one of my favorite tracks, but this is where we really bring in the Bowie influence. To me, this song sounds very, very much like the type of music that he was writing with David Bowie for The Idiot or Lust for Life. And in fact, the guitar line, again, Crawl had some really hooky guitar lines, but it reminds me of Rebel Rebel.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, it's not, clearly it's not the same rhythm, but I listened to it and went, yeah, it's that style of guitar playing. Of course, Bowie was a very primitive guitar player, so he came up with that line. He only plays 2/3 of the Rebel Rebel line, by the way. Alan Parker plays the other third. Yeah, I think it's a great song, but it really does sound like those Berlin period albums to me. So it's an unusual throwback to be coming in 1981.
Yeah. I get a bit of a bluesy feel to this song. It's mid-tempo, whereas the first 4 songs have all been very up-tempo and bright. I agree it does have that sort of Bowie-ish feel to it. Rebel Rebel and the Diamond Dogs album in particular, Bowie played most of the guitar on that album. And as you said, he was a fairly primitive guitar player. And the thing that works for me on that album is the fact that he's a primitive guitar player, because it has the guitar has jagged edges to it that I think a professional guitar player would have smoothed off, especially for a Bowie kind of album. But yeah, every song on side 1 works for me. Actually, I probably prefer some of the other songs on side 1 to this one, but I still really, really like this one. I still think it's really good. But yeah, I didn't know that this is sort of like a favorite song for a lot of people on this album. It's not what I would have thought, but there you go.
And that was just looking at some reviews of the album real quick. I mean, it's hardly a scientific poll,
Well,
but
yeah.
It stood out enough that as I was looking through people's comments on the album, I saw that song come up quite a bit.
Yeah. So we get into side 2 now, and the first song is called Pumpin' for Jill.
So an interesting double track here for me, because you end side 1 with a Bowie-esque song, and then you turn it over, and to me, the first song on side 2 is a Bowie-esque song. Pumpin' for Jill could not possibly be more reminiscent of David Bowie's Heroes. It's got that long, I think it's actually a synthesizer on Pumpin' for Jill instead of Robert Fripp with an EBow on Heroes, but it's got that long droning high note behind the song. The guitar sounds very much like the Cars of the same period. So we've kind of left garage rock now, and we're very much into a New York new wave sound mixed with David Bowie's Heroes. And interestingly, Iggy dials back his vocal performance. So he's no longer singing brash and way out front. He's doing a more naturalistic, if that makes sense, I think, vocal delivery on the song. And that has the characteristic, because he can be more subtle and more nuanced. If you're just yelling at the top of your voice, it's hard to, you can't put in dynamics, and you can't really vary your performance too much. So again, I don't want to come off as comparing him too much to Bowie. It's just he and Bowie had such a big influence on each other, it was impossible to avoid. But I think he actually sounds a little Bowie-esque on this song. I think that both Houston Is Hot Tonight and Pumpin' for Jill are strong influences in a circular manner. They influenced Bowie to where, not on Let's Dance, because Let's Dance was so influenced by, oh my God, why am I drawing a blank right now? Who co-wrote all the songs on Let's Dance?
Well, it was produced by Nile Rodgers.
Noel Rogers, yes. Doggone, sorry about that. Old man
That's
brain.
right.
So Noel Rogers is such a heavy influence on Let's Dance, even though it has an Iggy Pop song on it. But when you get to Tonight and Never Let Me Down, those tracks fit right in with Houston is Hot Tonight and Pumping for Jill.
Yeah.
So I think Bowie Iggy is pointing us to where Bowie is going to go later in the 80s.
Yeah. Now, my notes were very similar to yours. I said that the rhythm guitar has a new wave feel, which and the keys do as well. But then you do have that sort of single note, whether it's a guitar or a synth, that gives it that sort of Frippian Berlin era sort of Bowie vibe. And then there's this little synth break in the middle. It only lasts for like about 2 or 3 bars or something like that. But you know, it's really, really cool. And then and this is another winner for me, this song. The sort of la 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 backing vocals, I think, work a lot better on this song than they did on Rock and Roll Party. But
Right.
yeah, overall, yeah, I really like this song. So the next song is Happy Man.
Happy Man. So reggae was having a big, I know reggae was much more popular in the UK than it was in the US. Although it had a bit of popularity on the coasts, especially. But Happy Man is a very reggae-esque song. And probably not coincidentally, again, this is a song that I feel is kind of pointing to where Bowie is going to go on his Tonight album. Also, kind of like Pumpin' for Jill, I think this is the song that is stylistically, well, actually, I shouldn't say that because we're going to get into some really weird songs here in a minute. But of the songs written by Iggy directly, or written by Iggy and Kroll, I don't think this song really matches the tone of anything else on the album. So it's very much an outlier. Plus, reggae isn't really my style, so it's not one of my favorite songs on the album, but I don't think it's bad.
Yeah. Well, my first reaction to this song was Iggy Goes Ska. You know,
Yeah.
and I think for me the genre works for him as well, and the horns sound, you know, very much in line with that, you know, because ska always had that sort of, you know, heavy horn sound, which yeah, the guitar though on this song doesn't skank like a ska or a reggae song does. It almost has a bit of a country vibe to it. So
Okay.
it's a sort of a weird melange in this song, but I like it. So we get into the last 3 songs, and as I said, the last 3 songs were produced by Tommy Boyce from the Boyce and Hart songwriting team that wrote songs for the Monkees and a lot of other 60s pop artists. And I believe Arista brought Tommy Boyce in to really give this album more of a commercial sheen. And so the first of the 3 Tommy Boyce produced songs is Bang Bang.
Right. So Bang Bang is probably my other candidate for favorite song on this album. I love the song. Now, my first exposure to it, again, I hate to keep bringing up Bowie, but you can't talk, it's hard to talk about modern Iggy without talking about Bowie, or at least Iggy in the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
And of course, Bowie covers Bang Bang on Never Let Me Down.
Yes.
He does a very different version of it, but I like Bowie's version as well. But once again, we have a song that is radically different than anything else on the album. So Iggy is apparently under some pressure to produce a commercial song, something that can be a single for the album. And by the way, I just made a few quick notes here on some other things that were popular or significant in 1981. Let's see here. Of course, Blondie's The Tide is High, John Lennon's Double Fantasy album, Adam and the Ants, Kings of the Wild Frontier, Kool and the Gang, Celebration, the Rolling Stones, Tattoo You, Foreigner 4, Journey's Escape, the Human League's Dare album. 1981 was a huge year in music and stylistically all over the map. Oh, the Stray Cats first
Yeah.
album came out in 1981.
And
So
considering my t-shirt, I'd be remiss not to mention that Devo's Whip It was a huge hit in 1981 as well. So there you go.
There you go. I'm just with such a broad spectrum of popular music, there can't have been anything specific in mind when your record company comes and says, I need you to produce a hit, right?
Yeah.
But even with that caveat, Bang Bang is not a hit song. I listen to that and go, no, it was not going to get radio play. Again, there were no videos yet, at least not from American bands. I think English bands had been making videos since the 70s. But there was no way that song was going to be commercially successful. But regardless, I think it's a fantastic song.
Yeah.
It's got, again, dialed back vocals. He is no longer, in fact, for the rest of the album, he's not singing over the top. He got all of that out of his system on side one.
Yeah.
So he's delivering a much more nuanced performance. He's producing and just the way he says that line, bang, bang, I got mine.
Yeah.
It's almost like it feels like a middle finger to the record company. And they may have felt the same way because they dropped him after this album.
Yeah, they did. I mean, the next album was Zombie Birdhouse, and that was on Chris Stein's label. Chris Stein being the guitarist from Blondie. And he had his own short-lived label, which I think was called Animal. And so, yeah, the next Zombie Birdhouse is on Chris Stein's Animal label. So, but yeah, this song, as you said, was covered by Bowie on Never Let Me Down. I actually prefer Iggy's version over David Bowie's. Peter Kerr and I did in defense of Never Let Me Down. And that's actually what led to this show, because we were talking about Bang Bang. And I said, oh, I prefer Iggy's version. He was like, oh, I think I prefer David Bowie's version. And it was like, well, that Party album's definitely one that's worth talking about. So that's why we're doing this now. Unfortunately, Peter couldn't be with us because he had family commitments. But yeah, I think Iggy's vocal works better than Bowie's on this song. And I like the fact that the production on Iggy's version is a little more understated than Bowie's. Bowie's is very brash and loud.
Right.
But yeah, I still like Bowie's version, but I think Iggy's version is better. And again, the guitar solo to me is a bit Devo-esque. So yeah, overall, really good song. I mean, Bowie really thought this was one of Iggy's better songs, and that's why he covered it.
Sure.
So now we get into a couple of cover versions to end the album, and the first one is Sea of Love.
Right. So this is why earlier I said I don't want to say Happy Man is the strangest outlier on the album, because the last two tracks are so far out there. And if you have the CD version, it's got two additional songs which are even further out there. So I really feel like Iggy just didn't have enough material for a full album, right?
Yeah.
So Sea of Love, it's a cover song. It was a hit in 1959.
Yes.
The only hit the album or from the artist. Iggy does a straight up faithful rendition of the album. It's not reinterpreted. It's not like transformed into a garage rock song. It's not punk. He does a faithful cover of Sea of Love. It works. His voice works surprisingly well. I mean, it's totally at odds with the rest of the album. So I guess it's really up to the listener as to whether as a single you like that song. If you like that song, you should like Iggy's version of the song. You know, if you want other like Iggy Pop garage rock songs, it's not going to work for you at all. But I just keep wondering as I'm listening to it, was this sincere? Did he mean this? I mean, now Iggy is of an age that he undoubtedly listened to this song as a kid. So maybe it's a song he loved and genuinely wanted to perform. but you know, it feels ironic to me. I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's like, here, you want a commercial hit? I'm going to give you this cover of a song from 1959 that doesn't sound anything like me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm going to have to agree to disagree with you a little bit on this one, in as much as I think this is the one song in the album that doesn't really work for me.
Okay.
Um, and I think it's because he does such a straight version of it. It just, I don't know. Iggy hadn't really, I think it was a little later in his career that he perfected his crooning vocal. On this one, I don't think his crooning vocal really works for me. But you know, at this stage, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I obviously knew this song from the Honey Drippers version a little later in the 80s.
Right.
You know, which is beautifully sung by Robert Plant. But yeah, I don't know. Ivan Kral's guitar solo is very nice on this song. I really like that. So it has that going for it. But overall, this is really an outlier on the album for me, on an album full of outliers. But
Right.
yeah, this one doesn't convince me, I'm afraid. So yeah, this is like the one song I'm really, you know, if I was on a CD, I might think about skipping. But I mean, obviously you can't do that on vinyl. But yeah, yeah. The next one's Time Won't Let Me, which is another cover version. And you know, this is a quite different cover version.
Right. So a song from 1966 this time. So by 66, Iggy was in bands. So this was very contemporary. Not contemporary by 1981, obviously, but
Hmm.
it at least would have been contemporary when he started off as a performer. But this time, rather than a straight up faithful recreation of it, we do get a modern reinterpretation of the song. And I would argue that this song is the most new wave of all of the songs on the album. It's got very little guitar. It's very synth heavy. It's very bass heavy. So those are characteristics of a lot of new wave music. Um, it doesn't even, I don't think it even has a guitar solo, does it? It has a synth solo.
Yeah, I think so.
So I mean, again, it's okay. I wonder why it's included, and I can only again, I only conclude that he just didn't have enough material for an album, and they were like, look, you got to come up with, you have to have at least X number of minutes to put out a, you know, an LP.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
this
it's,
song,
I don't hate it, but
yeah. Well, this song's a cover by a sort of fairly obscure sort of garage rock band called The Outsiders. I think they were from Ohio. Um, and for me, it's a much better cover version than Sea of Love. I like this much. I think sort of 60s garage rock is a much better fit for Iggy than sort of 50s doo-wop. I do agree that the arrangement for me is sort of a neat cross between new wave and soul.
okay.
And I like it. I think it's a good closer to the album. So again, you know, we see these two but that's the thing, isn't it? Cover versions always do tend to be a little bit the sort of thing that people will disagree on. They either love cover versions or they hate them. I'm doing a show next week. I don't know whether Reed will be with me or not, but we're doing a cover version show, a panel on the show. Really looking forward to that. But yeah, I think it's a good album closer. I like it. So overall, your thoughts on this album?
Well, again, if you're a modern Iggy Pop fan, I cannot go back to 1981 and look into the minds of Iggy Pop fans at the time. But if you're a modern Iggy Pop fan, I have no reason why you would, or no idea why you wouldn't love this album. It definitely feels like two EPs rather than one cohesive album. Side one is an EP, fairly cohesive. Side two is an EP. It actually feels like an EP of B-sides to me because
Mhm.
every song on side two is so different. So it's really more like 5 singles on side one and 5 B-sides on side two. but within that parameter, I think there's a lot of stuff to love on this album. I find it enjoyable. Sometimes an album that's too schizophrenic is distracting, right? And
Yeah.
it takes you out of the experience. But in this case, I find that it adds interest. And honestly, after 4 songs of Iggy shouting at me, it's nice to get something that's a little bit more nuanced, that there's a little bit more dynamics to it. So I enjoy the album. I think it's of the Arista albums, Family Values, Soldier, and Party. Party is my favorite of the 3.
Well, there you go. I don't know if I'd go quite that far. I think I like New Values a little bit better, but I think this is a great album. I think that I do not understand why the critics savaged this album. Like, they were really, really vicious to this album.
Right.
And, 9 of the 10 tracks on this album I really enjoy. And yeah, there is an eclecticism to a lot of the music on this album, but that's endearing to me. I think it works. You get to hear Iggy do various different things that Iggy would do throughout his career, rather than just sticking to one note. I think the album on the whole, works really, really well. So,
Right. Can I mention the CD bonus tracks?
Yeah, please do.
So if you get the CD reissue, which as far as I know is the only thing that's currently easily available. In fact, you can get all 3 albums. The 3 Arista albums are available as a set for $15. And kids, that's $15 well spent.
Yeah.
If you want to pick up that set. It includes 2 extra tracks, a track called Speak to Me and a track called One for My Baby. And they are both way out there. I understand why you would not have included these on the LP. Now, I haven't looked at the timings, so I don't know if he had, if they were left off for time reasons or not. But Speak to Me is almost a country song. It's acoustic guitar with Iggy doing an approximation of like a Johnny Cash style country vocal delivery. And I think that is a very strange fit for Iggy.
Yes.
And then in the middle of all of this, rather than having a guitar solo, it has shimmery synthesizer pads and no solo. And it doesn't fit the song at all. It's the weirdest compositional choice. So it's interesting. I mean, again, I don't hate it. I don't like, oh, this is a fantastic song, but it's weird enough that you listen to it and go, oh, it's Iggy singing country. Well, that's weird. But it's not as weird as the next song, because the next song is straight up cocktail jazz. Now, after, coming in 2023, I'm convinced that he did not mean this one ironically, because now he's released actual albums of cocktail jazz.
Yeah.
This is apparently something that Iggy enjoys. But in 1981, this must have been strange. So One for My Baby is a song from a Fred Astaire musical from 1943. Give me one for my baby and one more for the road. And you were talking about his crooning voice. It's not a reinterpreted song. It's not like Speak to Me, like Time Won't Let Me, where it's an older song redone as garage rock. It's just straight up cocktail jazz.
Yeah.
And that is, well, one, it doesn't fit his voice well. He would grow into that later, I think, although it'll never be my favorite Iggy style. But at this point of his career, he does not have the right voice for it. And conceptually, it is so bizarre.
Yeah. Sounds weird. I'll have to track those CDs down, because I only have these Iggy albums on vinyl, so they don't have the bonus tracks. The album's only 35 minutes long, so they probably could have fit those tracks on there if they really, really wanted to. But US companies did tend to put out shorter albums than British companies did. So anyway, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Iggy Pop's Party. From Reed and I, we both definitely say this is a really worthwhile Iggy Pop album, and you should definitely go and if you go to your listening app of choice, check it out. We think there's a lot of great music here to enjoy. Reed, thank you so much for coming on the channel and being my guest today for this show. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you again for inviting me. I had a wonderful time. Been looking forward to this for a long time.
Yeah. Now, Reed doesn't have his own channel, but he is a frequent guest on the Contrarians. In fact, he's often a frequent host on the Contrarians. So please do go to the Contrarians and check out some of Reed's other work. I will leave a link to the Contrarians in the description. Please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. Everything's playlisted. So if you want to look at some of my other In Defense Of shows, there's a playlist for those. Or if you want to look at my Studio Albums Rank show, there's a playlist for those. Or if you want to look at my Bicyclelegs Discovers Rush shows, there's a playlist for those, etc., etc. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at bicyclelegs on Instagram and Twitter, and I now have a dedicated bicyclelegs Facebook page. So please come and give those all a follow and join in the conversation with me. I'd really love to have you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Cheers.